Hello and welcome to FFRF's Ask an Atheist. I'm Liz Cavell, and this week we're talking about our next door neighbor. It's Minnesota. We're going to discuss a very alarming recent state church violation that FFRF is fighting there in Minnesota and an interesting dust-up at the Mall of America. I'm joined by FFRF's legal fellow Hirsh Joshi and our legal director, Patrick Elliott. Hi, guys.
Hi. Hello.
And as always, we want to hear what you're thinking about the topics we're discussing today. So please leave your questions in the Facebook chat below, or you can email them to askanatheist@ffrf.org. So let's jump right in. Recently, someone in Minnesota reached out to report to FFRF that a new county jail being built is, for some reason, including proselytizing messages all over the building. So Hirsh, you handled this one for FFRF. Tell us a little bit more about what was reported and what FFRF did.
Sure. So last week I sent a legal letter to Itasca County, Minnesota officials regarding a large Ten Commandments display at their new $75 million jail. They also had 3 religious quotes, 2 from Ronald Reagan and 1 from Thomas Jefferson. Now, the Ten Commandments painting is over 2 stories high, and the quotes surround the people in the jail. So this is kind of a jarring violation here, but let's talk about it.
Did we see the photo that shows the scale sent in with the complainant or someone standing next to it? Just kind of shows you the Ten Commandments display at scale, which I'm assuming is some common area of the jail, right? But like, can't be missed. This is a huge, imposing display of one particular religious sect's commandments. And so this is a big deal. And it also is something that is extremely coercive, because we know that in the context of our jails and prisons, the relationship between the people that are held there and the government is like peak coercion, right? It's hard to imagine a more coercive governmental relationship than between people housed in jails and the sheriff's department or whoever's maintaining the jail. So FFRF obviously complained about that on those grounds. And so far, what have we learned?
Well, so far it's been radio silence from the county. They haven't replied to us at all, but not so much from the media. Our letter caught the attention of Fox News, the Star Tribune, and the Minnesota Post. And just yesterday, the county commissioners met, and a few of the commissioners discussed the public's reaction to FFRF's request that the religious displays coming down in the jail were apparently taken down, but we have no confirmation of that. And we have a clip of the videos that we're going to show.
Now that it's my turn to make comments, would I be okay with keeping the Ten Commandments on the wall? Yeah, I would be. You know, my question is it legal? That I don't know. I'm seeing people shake their head, yes. Next question is, there's going to be a legal battle. Okay, so how much money do you want to put on the line for that? I mean, there's my other questions for you on that aspect. I've had over 387 phone calls last week alone. Okay, over 500 emails. I can't even tell you the texts, how many texts there were. You know, I'd have someone text me and say, your voicemail's full. Well, I just emptied 100 of them 6 hours earlier. So I kind of give you an idea of how important these are. Now, how many people called me and said, hey, take it down? Well, less than 6.
Well, I guess that's the old majority rules school of thought when it comes to protecting the religious rights of the minority. But Patrick, you hear him talk about the threat of a lawsuit. What are your thoughts on how serious this violation is and how the county should be thinking about the threat of a lawsuit over this?
Yeah. So first of all, this isn't just picking on Minnesotans, because I am a Minnesotan myself and very familiar with this part of the state, which is about 3 hours north of the Twin Cities. So it's a much smaller community, very much lake country, and you hear that in some of the accent that we heard earlier. But it certainly is a huge religious problem and a liability for the county. To put up it has to be, Liz, like the largest 10 Commandments display I think I've seen. And we've been doing this, you and I have been doing this work for a very long time. We've sued over multiple 10 Commandments displays, have had multiple 10 Commandments displays removed, usually in public schools. But on the legal issue, a jail is a coercive environment. Obviously, people don't have the option to be there. Some of them are awaiting trial. Some people are serving a sentence. And it's not something for the sheriff or the jail administrator to select what religion these people should have, or to try to coerce them by putting up religious postings all around to get them to believe in it. So it's a huge, I think the commissioner is correct that it's a huge liability for the county. And the other, I think, interesting piece of this clip, Liz, because we've seen this play out in most state church violations that we see, is that that most people don't go to their county commissioners meetings, but as soon as religion enters the fray, everybody goes. So I haven't seen the beginning of that meeting, but it sounds like hundreds of people, if not dozens of people, are there complaining to their commissioners because they want to add or keep the religious quotes in the county jail. And so I think that tells you a little bit about why state church separation is important, to not have that majority, those hundreds of people outweigh the people who contacted us. Hirsh, I think we had something like 20 complaints come in on this. So that's quite a bit.
Right, and it was like 20 complaints, and all of them came in on one day, and then after that even, we still got more and more people complaining about it. I want to reflect on one thing that Liz said about, the popularity of this, and how, our First Amendment rights can't be subject to the ballot box. But for some reason, they seem to think that it is. The commissioner was there saying, yeah, I see some heads nodding, excuse me. And I'm sure there were a lot of prominent constitutional law scholars in that room with him. But it's just simply not the case that our First Amendment rights can be subject to that ballot box. So it doesn't really matter whether people liked it or not. It's a violation.
Right, and it's kind of the whole purpose of the Bill of Rights, right, is to protect minority rights, because there will always be majoritarian pressures placed on the government. And the government, we won't watch all the footage from that meeting, but one by one the commissioners address the controversy, and one by one the first thing they say is, I myself am a Christian, I'm a good Catholic boy. And that's the whole point, is that there's the majority is already well represented. The issue is protecting minority believers and minority group citizens from having those majoritarian religious viewpoints forced on them by the tyrannical power of majority rule, right? And as Patrick's pointing out, every time one of these controversies gets exposed in the media, and all of a sudden it's like, cue the mob. It's mob rule at these meetings. And 300 people called and only 6 want me to do the minority thing. Right. And yes, we understand that, the majority would want to impose the Christian religion on incarcerated people who have no choice. They're literally a captive audience. They have no choice but to have whatever's in the jail imposed on them. So it doesn't get any more coercive than that. And the whole point is we're trying to protect minority groups from that type of pressure placed on them by the government, right? We're not just talking about in the culture. We're talking about the county. The county's in charge of the jail. And if it's on the county wall, emblazoned, 50 feet in the air, it's the county that's speaking that message to the people in its jail. And it's a constitutional violation.
And I think one of the good things here is that a lot of the public reaction that we saw was actually favorable to state church separation. I think people understood, and even those commissioners understood, that this was not legally permissible, despite people wanting to keep the quotes there. I can also say from FFRF's perspective, we were quick to respond to this. I think the public got a tour of this new jail facility on, let's say, like on Friday, at the end of April, and then we sent a letter on the Monday following. So we were right on top of it before any people were sent to that jail. We were there to try to intervene, and not just because of the federal rights. I'm a Minnesota-based attorney. I'm licensed here. That's a problem under the Minnesota Constitution too. And so I think that the jail administrator or the sheriff or the county would be incorrect in thinking, oh, maybe the U.S. Supreme Court will agree with us, or maybe some court will agree with us if we ever got there. They've got a bigger problem, and that's the Minnesota courts. I do not think would tolerate this type of thing, this kind of imposing your religion on somebody else who has no choice to be there. So I think we did a good job, Hirsh. You did a good job getting that letter out, and the public reaction that I've heard so far was very favorable to FFRF intervening and trying to protect people who are about to be sent to this facility.
Right. And I think despite the reactions on conservative media and the reaction in what seems to be a pretty Christian community, the commissioners, we didn't clip, we only clipped that small part of the video, but they do seem to understand and see the gigantic writing on the wall, which is this really is coercive and problematic and legally problematic, both under our Establishment Clause, but like Patrick said, under the Minnesota Constitution, that it's problematic and not the right thing. So I don't think, even though we haven't heard a response from the county, I think they'll probably, we expect, take measures to undo, paint over, somehow make the jail a secular space before they even have anybody moving into the facility. So that is a good thing. I also wanted to just mention, I'm sure we all watched a little bit more of that commissioner's meeting, and we didn't clip it, but one of the things, I think to their credit, even though they had to explain how Christian they were and how much they personally wanted the Ten Commandments up in the jail, the one commissioner we listened to did reflect on the fact that he wished, I'm paraphrasing him, but that we saw this level of kind of community enthusiasm and also notoriety for the county with other issues. There's so many things that are going on in county government, and this is the only thing that anybody cares about or that the media is interested in, and that's really a shame. And I think that is definitely a reflection that we have made many times. And then another commissioner points out, and I thought that this was a worthwhile point, that this isn't really the legal thing that they can do in the jail, and isn't that a shame? But if you really care about the jails, I'm sure the county would love to have volunteers. And of course, he's talking about prison ministry. Mm-hmm. But also the point is made that all of a sudden everybody cares about the county jail in this small question of the decor and whether or not it's religious enough. It'd be great if that energy could be turned to something positive for the county and the people jailed in the county.
And just perusing some conservative media that did pick up this story, Fox News, you see in the comments everyone just kind of blaming every inmate or every person in the jail and saying, well, maybe they shouldn't have ended up there in the first place. Not really having the skepticism towards the government that you would think would come from this so-called religious liberty side. So it's a little bit odd that they're kind of nitpicking where and when they like government coercion and government promoting something. It's only when it's what they like and to who they find reprehensible. So just to the point I think Patrick was making, a lot of these people haven't been convicted of anything yet. And if they're in the jail, they probably haven't been convicted of anything too serious. So to then see this 20 feet tall, Ten Commandments display that says, by the way, don't kill anyone, it's kind of a little bit too much here. So I don't, just aside from the religious liberty point, this is also just really weird.
Yeah. And also just to point out, because we often hear that the Ten Commandments are somehow a reflection of our secular laws, and that is just wrong and kind of dumb because most of those laws, right, they're up on the screen now, not laws, most of those religious commandments have absolutely nothing to do with secular things. They have to do with religious observance, how not worshiping other gods, not making graven images, not taking the Lord's name in vain, keeping the Sabbath, honoring your mom and dad, I guess. I don't know. Unfortunately for me, not a law. Lying and coveting, and of course adultery, which we all know is very legal. Right, steal and kill are kind of the only secular equivalencies you have on the list. So it's important to note, and it was said a lot in that meeting, I think wrongly, that, everyone in the county jail is probably could have used a little more of the 10 Commandments because they must have broken one of the commandments to end up here. I mean, that's probably just wrong considering it's a county jail. Many people are housed there while they await trial, which means they've yet to be found guilty of any crime. And the people who are housed in county jail or incarcerated there are usually lower level offenders. It's not a prison. So that's a
Liz,
really
this goes back,
bad point that we hear a lot.
I'm just going to say this goes back to, I guess I would share this with our viewers. If you listen when people talk about the 10 Commandments, they like the concept of it, but I do not think they know the 10 Commandments. We certainly have highlighted at least the 4 first ones are purely religious obligations. And then the other ones, which the Supreme Court has actually commented on in some cases, are arguably, other obligations, but with divine sanction. So like you're going to get punished if you don't do these things. That's, certainly a problem. But we've come across it. It's so common now that people get them. We've corrected government officials when they wanted to put up the 10 Commandments, and they've actually improperly done that in terms of leaving things, adding additional numbering or adding additional commandments. Certainly there's a debate among religions about what are the true 10 Commandments and how to edit those and how to quote those. So this display itself is arguably, if we go back 200 years, you'd have a pretty big debate between possibly, the Catholics and Protestants as to whether this is the appropriate 10 Commandments. So that's just something I cue our viewers on to, is to pay attention when people talk about it, because I think they like the idea of it. And when you actually look at them, I don't think this is actually something that's intended, obviously, to relate to the lives of the people that are in the jail. People just think, oh, of course, the 10 Commandments as a concept is something I like, without really considering what it says, what it is, how that difference between different Christian religions and Jewish religions. So it's certainly a thing that I've noticed over our years, Liz, that people get it wrong all the time. We've had some of them are funny when we have to correct people and say, you've actually misnumbered your commandments. You don't know Roman numerals.
Yeah,
so,
Roman numerals are tough.
Yeah.
Sometimes
so anyway, I
you
think
engrave
that's
the wrong one in your government piece of granite. Well, you also are striking on something that's really important and relevant to the Establishment Clause and the the constitutional issues, which are, it's a county official, it's a government actor that has to make the initial decision, and who knows how this whole thing came to pass, but it's not right, and it's not in any way what was envisioned. It's exactly what was envisioned to be prohibited when our First Amendment was crafted. That government officials would be sitting down and parsing which version of the 10 Commandments, a more Protestant one or a more Catholic one, or which commandments would be included, because there's several versions in the Bible and they differ in their content. How many commandments? Some of them have the 11th vestigial commandment. There's a lot of, like Patrick's mentioning, disagreement amongst and between religious sects on what the 10 Commandments actually consist of. And the fact that the county would be stepping in and saying, this is the 10 Commandments, we selected this and we selected these religious quotes, is no business of the government and not in any way their role. It's exactly what the First Amendment was passed to prohibit when it comes to the government stepping in and adopting, official or adopting one religious sect's holy rules over another, and then inflicting that on its citizenry.
So now, this Ten Commandments display, just to give a little bit more factual background here, is in the gymnasium or in the recreation center of this jail. Now, the quotes that I mentioned are actually right above the cells, so that's probably a little bit more coercive than just the gym where they don't actually have to be. And some of these quotes are just suggesting that, as you can see on your screen, that the Bible holds the answer for all the problems men face by Ronald Reagan Sr. And some of the other quotes are a little bit more neutral towards a religion, but they're just misattributed. For instance, one is attributed to George Washington when in fact it was by and said by George Washington Carver. A big difference there. My theory is that someone just took like a quote of the day like sort of calendar and was just like, that's the one I want. Paint that on the wall. So no matter what, they have to do at least one paint job and add the word Carver to something here. But let's see if they even do that.
Right. We'll see. And of course, FFRF will publicize whatever the outcome is. Hopefully the county will, it sounds like, be coming into compliance with the Constitution and the Minnesota Constitution. So to be continued. But that wasn't the only religious conflict in Minnesota in recent days. Patrick, tell us a little about the pastor who wanted to force the Mall of America to host his religious worship event.
Yeah, this is Pastor Sean Foyt, who has made waves in the past, usually with like political worship rallies or for his rallies during the pandemic. And really, so he sought another publicity stunt this week, and this time it was in Minnesota. He had posted on social media that he was planning to host a large worship service at the Mall of America on Sunday. So just this past Sunday. That was news to the officials at the mall because he clearly hadn't coordinated or sought a permit or anything like that. That's a problem because the Mall of America is privately owned, requires permits for events. And so they told him on, I think the day before, on Saturday, via a letter, you're not welcome to host an event. We're not giving you permission. And you'll be trespassing if you decide to go through with an event on our private space without a proper approval. And so he ended up seemingly going forward with the event or attempting to do part of it. And I think we have a clip of what was going on outside the mall after he got turned away from hosting it inside.
Now you can go into this mall and you can rage on Ramadan. Yeah. And there can be shootings and there can be violence and they'll say nothing. Right. But when Christians show up, they're going to give you one of these. And so this is a year in 2024 where we need to flip this state.
So the implication there is that you can, or that it's only Christians who are being asked to receive proper permission for their amplified music events in private spaces. And the thing he's holding up is whatever, who knows what it is. It's a pink piece of paper, but presumably it's some sort of, you can't trespass here, or here's what the rules are with regard to private events in the mall. And the idea, or the thing that he's saying, which probably is devoid of context, is that other protesters that have shown up at the mall have been permitted. Protesters is what he's saying. I don't know if he's saying rioters on Ramadan. Who knows what he's talking about? But he's saying it's the Christians who want to assemble that are being persecuted. Again, there's just this rush to claim persecution somehow as the majority religious group when it comes to the Christian nationalist contingent.
Yeah, and he had tweeted about it too. So it's definitely this persecution complex. I think Sean Foyt had tweeted basically that the mall was coming after him and violating his First Amendment rights. And I can't read all of this right now on my screen.
We did not step foot inside the Mall of America as they locked the doors to anyone wearing Let Us Worship shirts, right? Again, some context. because it's not like I'm just wearing my Christian shirt and I'm just trying to go to Hot Topic like everyone else. You're literally walking in with a guitar and amplification equipment and a mob of people trying to hold an event, a worship event, inside what is a privately owned shopping space. So yeah, you're going to get some resistance. That's not the same thing as being kicked out of a space because you're a Christian. Obviously, there's some context there that Sean Foyt doesn't like to give.
Right, and I think he had tweeted also that he called it a First Amendment violation. I don't know if we have that tweet, but he's definitely indicating like that somehow is right. I smell a First Amendment lawsuit rolling in,
Yep.
which is funny to us. We're all First Amendment lawyers here, right? That a private space can say, we're not giving you a permit for your event. And by the way, you, Sean Foyt, we're not allowing you to come into the mall, which they have the right to do. So FFRF did respond on Twitter to his claim,
Right.
basically calling it out as the height of Christian privilege. They demand the right to disrupt your everyday activities like shopping so they can proselytize and annoy. And so we gave kudos to the Mall of America, which I don't know how much they deserve kudos, but I think it's appropriate for them to decide what events they want on their property and not. And that includes the outdoor space. I'm familiar, as probably a lot of people in Minnesota have, or there's 40 million visitors a year to this mall. It's huge complex. So their outdoor spaces, it's not the same as just because you're on a sidewalk to think this is a city sidewalk, I'm now on public property. The mall probably owns quite a large area surrounding it, including parking structures and various roads. So I think he's a little bit annoyed that he was getting in trouble or getting told to move when he was outside, but that's probably also because you're still on the mall's property. It doesn't matter purely because you're inside or outside. As us as First Amendment lawyers, we understand, being on a public sidewalk, a public street, a public park, those are places where you can certainly host protests and activities. Some of those still might require permits if you're doing something like he's doing. But I thought it was interesting that he's, somehow this pastor is not a First Amendment expert. I guess I'll just say that he thinks his rights he's going to have a First Amendment lawsuit rolling in over his denial of hosting an event.
Right. Again, just to spell it out, the First Amendment constrains government action. And while the mall was my God in 1998, it is not the government. It is just a private business. So you are not cooking up a First Amendment lawsuit by going and getting yourself kicked out of the mall.
Yeah, and I think we have one other clip of the event that, some of the stuff he's saying is not your typical pastor remarks. I think we have one more clip.
Courage across this state to begin pushing back the gates of hell in the malls, in the universities, in the streets. Raise up a church that refuses to bow to the spirits of this age. And God bless every person here. Lord, we pray for the churches of this state. In 2024, let them rise up with boldness, rise up with courage and might. And just pray over the person on your right and left. Say, God, make them bold. Make them bold today, right here on the street.
Right, and that was just like classic Christian nationalist, right? He turns to political ideology, which is what it's about as much as religious ideology. It's all the casting towards 2024 and rise up, and we're going to make changes in Minnesota, and that's all like the Christian nationalist political ideology, and that's what all this persecution complex stuff is about.
And it's always over the smallest thing. Just putting this, in perspective, he forgot to apply for a permit here, right? This is a minor inconvenience. He easily could have gotten a permit and walked in and scheduled an event there. So he's just kind of crying foul over essentially his own incompetence here, which is really just a classic thing that Christian nationalists have started to do in the year of their Lord, 2024. I also want to point out that he started to talk about, this other religious group as though they're getting some preferential treatment with Ramadan. And he kept saying raging on Ramadan, which first of all makes him sound way cooler than what I sure intended. But it's a little odd because I'm sure they also just got a permit, right? I think they just did the thing that Mall of America requires you to do. I don't think that there was anything wrong that they did or any preferential treatment they got. They just followed the rules. And for some reason, that's just too much for him.
I think actually, so I just as a local, I guess I'll chime in. I think what he's talking about in April, when Ramadan ended, there's actually a large Somali Muslim population that goes to the mall. It's become a tradition when Ramadan ends, and so that was happening in April. And there were teenagers that were fighting in the mall, probably as teenagers do. So it's really, to me, not connected at all to the religion. He's trying to make, in my opinion, kind of an Islamophobic comment and say that the mall permitted this. There was no permit involved. That was just people going, like people do for Christmas, they go Christmas shopping. So there are a large population of people who had a purpose at this mall at this time. He's trying to use that as to saying, look at how they were treated versus how we were treated. And by the way, the people who were fighting were cited, for fighting, and they were minors, not a very well-funded pastor who could presumably rent a facility or request a permit, who chose not to. So that's a little bit of the local context, I think, with what he's referring to. But there's certainly two very distinct things going on. That has nothing to do with his event.
You mean Sean Foyt misrepresented with no context something that happened at the Mall of America to boost his own persecution complex? Yeah, it's really funny. It's just this, like Hirsh is saying, this isn't like revolutionary. There's a lot of ways to get kicked out of a mall. I'm sure we all remember. It's a mall. You can get kicked out for fighting. You can get kicked out for shoplifting. You can get kicked out for bringing your guitar and 400 people and refusing to leave. It's just a thing that can happen at a mall because a mall is not a government.
Right.
And yes, that's very different from a bunch of people agreeing to go break their fast at the food court. And then some teenagers get in a fight and probably get kicked out. This is all just silly. And I love how it all means that like the mall, just like colleges and universities, is the place of the devil. And we're back there. And everything old is new again.
I'm just like waiting for there to be zero institutions that like these people are willing to go to or not get permits for.
I know.
Because like,
I mean,
what's
the mall,
next?
come on. Our malls are dying. Don't bring the devil in. The mall has enough problems. Just let the old ladies exercise and let the few people that want to go to the food court and, in this case, ride the roller coasters, everybody's just trying to get their capitalism on. Just go away.
And in contrast to Sean Foyt's unpermitted event at the mall, so this is also our Minnesota show. So last week we had non-religious Minnesotans gather at the state capitol for a permitted event. Some of these photos are from the last year, but for a National Day of Reason. So we were a part of that at FFRF with humanists, atheists, and there we have somebody from our Minnesota Grand Rapids chapter and one of our state policy people, Ryan Dudley, tabling in the Minnesota Capitol for a Day of Reason. And it was really a cool event, one, because it was permitted, but two, legislators. That Minnesota has a secular government caucus made up by a large number of legislators, and I think we saw at least 8 of them come to this event and speak. So there's besides what's going on with the people trying to push Christian nationalism, there's a contingent that is here and present and vocal and seems to be pretty well organized to say, we live in a secular state and we want secular government. One of the bills that we were pushing for that the legislature to take up is to provide secular options for sobriety and secular recovery options to not be coerced into religious recovery options. And so I think that was something that a lot of the legislators are sponsoring or co-sponsoring. And it was just really a nice event to be there and make connections with other people who want a secular government. And I think it's something maybe other states and other organizers should take a cue from, because this is something that could certainly be going on in other state capitals.
Yeah, that's a really cool event, and I know FFRF was excited to be able to participate in person. We have Patrick over there in the Twin Cities, and then Ryan Dudley made the trip. And these events are, you mentioned, coming as a response to the awful and unconstitutional tradition of allowing the National Day of Prayer to be a thing that's endorsed by our government, and we've been trying to push back in the ways that we can with celebrating the Day of Reason to coincide with that time. We also had last week a Day of Reason reception in DC that was also really great and involved some lawmakers that are in Congress in DC and committed to secular government and backing, reason-based policy and bills. And so that was also coinciding with the Day of Reason. And I know we were really proud to be involved in both of those events.
And I think, Patrick, remind me if I'm wrong on this, but I think that event at the Capitol in Minnesota took place on the same day that the Itasca County letter was sent out, or at least during the same week, right?
Yep, this is why this is like a great Ask an Atheist show. It's all very fresh. This all took place. That was on Wednesday, so May 1st is when we were out there at the state capitol for a day of reason. And I think on Monday you had sent the letter to Itasca County. So we had a lot of supporters at the event that were aware of it. So that was also kind of great to see. Actually, some of our FFRF members from Grand Rapids who run a chapter there were very pleased that we're representing them and fighting for them, because they're probably one of those 6 people who contacted their commissioner, and there's 300 others that are saying, hey, we want religion. So that's Julie Legg on the left is our chapter president in Grand Rapids, the actual city where the jail is being built. So we do have some representation and some opposition, despite being outnumbered in the northern part of the state, to say, hey, we want secular government, and we don't want you pushing religion.
And we're spotlighting Minnesota today because it's been like a weirdly active week in Minnesota for secularism and the fight to keep Minnesota secular. But actually, Minnesota has been a pretty strong secular state that we don't actually get a ton of state church complaints from as compared to other states. But of course, we know that those things happen everywhere because we have minority groups everywhere and Christian nationalists everywhere, and these things happen. But I do think we've had successes in Minnesota keeping things secular, and a lot of support, I think, from a pretty robust free thought community in Minnesota, which now includes Patrick Elliott, the strongest secularist in Minnesota. So it was good to kind of do a spotlight on Minnesota today. We love Minnesota. We're not picking on you. We love you. That's why we demand that you stay secular. All right, should we go?
I am watching the latest season of Fargo, so I don't know. It's a little too accurate sometimes with how we all talk, and it's well deserved to some extent.
You betcha. So we're gonna go for some audience questions. It's getting a little late. This one's about Itasca, and we'll just come back to this to kind of loop it back to some of the nuts and bolts. Someone asks, could the jail administration fight to keep this display up? Does FFRF have next steps in mind if this happens? We won't get super detailed on what happens next because it really matters a lot how the county responds. But you can probably tell, and I'll throw this to you, Patrick, but it does sound like the county recognizes that they have a problem on their hands that they need to solve.
Yeah, I think, and Hirsh actually may know a little better we believe they may have already painted over the displays. Because this is a secure facility, a jail, we can't just waltz in there and find out exactly what everything looks like. If they do not do that, again, we've heard from over 20 people, 20 area residents, and FFRF can sue. I mean, we can bring a state court lawsuit or a federal court lawsuit to enforce the Constitution if we have to. We hope we don't have to do that, and I hope that reason will prevail there and people will decide correctly. Let's not take a losing lawsuit on their side. So it's really their decision, and it sounds like things were moving in the right direction. I just don't know if the sheriff and the jail administrator have actually gone through and completely covered everything that was problematic.
And just one note on this. So there's rumors that they've repainted this over. The issue is that no media can really confirm this, and I can't confirm this either. So whether there's still like this live question or not is still a question that we have to answer ourselves. So whether they can fight for it or not depends on what they've done and whether they're willing to tell us.
Right. And again, it's not yet an open facility. So nobody's being housed there. Nobody goes to work there every day. Other than hopefully a painting crew.
Right.
But we're not, it's not like we're getting information from inside the jail. We'll just have to wait and see what comes back from the county or what we learn from people on the ground once it's open. So these are also, I'm just going to ask a couple more questions about the jail incident because we've got a few. How often does FFRF hear about religious coercion in jail and prison settings? And is it a more difficult issue to work on due to stigma around prisons or prisoners?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's very difficult a lot of times to get information out of these facilities because obviously the person's confined, so their ability to communicate can be delayed. So sometimes we do get letters or other information from people where there's a religious problem. I would say we don't hear a lot about it, despite concerns that I think it's going on in some places. Certainly not anything like this. I have never before seen, like a 2-story religious statement put in a facility this brazen. Where we do hear about it is also on a lot of times on the secular recovery. Some facilities, if somebody's in a facility and needs to be sober, sometimes they're required to attend religious programming to do that. And so we have intervened on several of those cases. Some of those states have actually been sued over that type of requirement. But the more brazen, like putting blatant religious statements all over the walls is less common. It's more common that we hear about a chaplain that's somehow putting on religious content that people can't escape, like that they're in a common room and they can't leave and the chaplain's doing something religious or a ministry from outside, but usually not. I'm speaking with generalities here, Liz, so you may be able to chime in too, but I think we haven't seen anything like this before.
Yeah, and that's saying a lot from Patrick, who's been doing this for a really long time. It's been over a decade for both of us, and this is really uncommon, which is why it really caught our attention. And I think it's getting the it sounds like the county is getting the appropriate advice on the egregiousness of what the county has done in this instance because of the environment and how coercive it is, the physical environment. And on regards to whether and why it's difficult to address religious coercion in the prison and jail context, I think it is so difficult for a number of reasons. Probably stigma around prisoners might be the least of the challenges. Patrick mentioned one of them, which is it's really hard to communicate. So the way that we learn about state church violations is from affected complainants that email us and submit a web form on our website, or they pick up the phone and call us, and that's really hard with people who are incarcerated. But also because the legal, without getting in the weeds, the legal landscape around prisons and jails is kind of its own beast. There's a lot more things at play when you have an incarcerated person because they're completely confined. So there's a big, strong, robust kind of free exercise side of the equation that exists in the law that says that governments that are keeping people confined have to accommodate all their religious needs. So they do have to provide Christian prisoners and people in jail with what they need to kind of fulfill their religious needs. So that doesn't translate very well to an atheist or a humanist prisoner or person incarcerated in terms of what does equal treatment look like. And that's where we have seen a lot of complaints from non-Christian or non-majority religion incarcerated people saying, hey, how come we can't hold our meetings, or we can't get our literature. And we've had to intervene sometimes for that purpose. But it can be harder to, I think courts give a lot of leeway to prison and jail administrators to kind of keep things administered and protect the rights of their prisoners, while also maintaining order and safety and all of those things. So there are a lot of challenges. But again, it's the most coercive environment imaginable. And so the threat is really real when it comes to government or religious coercion by the government. All right. So I'm going to say a couple more things that go away from Itasca, which is, wow, I didn't know there were National Day of Reason rallies. Is the National Day of Reason federally recognized? And if not, what can I do to help ensure it will be in the future? So, National Day of Reason. Is it federally recognized? Patrick, tell us.
Well, there are people in Congress who've sought to do that. So Representative Huffman and Representative Raskin, I believe, this year co-sponsored a resolution recognizing a National Day of Reason. And then you have some state legislators who were trying to sponsor similar resolutions, like in Minnesota. So in that sense, it's recognized by people who want it to make it happen. It's not the same as the National Day of Prayer, which is in federal law, which FFRF has sued over and tried to get overturned, and the courts have ruled basically that our organization and our members didn't have standing in order to challenge that law. I guess presumably the only person who could is the president, who annually is required to declare a National Day of Prayer. But I think the way to promote this is to reach out to your congresspeople or your state legislators and say, hey, I'm in this non-religious group. I think a National Day of Reason is something that would recognize me and and it's in contrast to the National Day of Prayer, which a lot of states have been adopting or getting resolutions or proclamations. So I think it's something people can certainly promote and reach out to their legislators on.
That's right. I'm going to leave it there because it's getting late, and that's a high note. So let's wrap up and say thank you, Hirsh. Thank you, Patrick. That concludes Ask an Atheist for this week. Don't forget, we also have a weekly broadcast TV show. It's called Free Thought Matters. This week, Annie Laurie Gaylor and Dan Barker speak with Catherine Stewart. She's the author of The Power Worshippers and a leading expert on Christian nationalism. Here's a preview.
Some of the most powerful opposition to Christian nationalism is actually coming from Christians themselves. I think about groups like the Baptist Joint Committee, Vote Common Good, Christians Against Christian Nationalism, the New Evangelicals, Faithful America, and so many other Christian Americans are standing up and saying, this does not represent our values. We're incredibly opposed to this this idea of exclusionary nationalism. Christian nationalism is really identity politics in a way. It's an idea of who gets to properly belong in our country and who doesn't. And this is grotesquely antithetical to the idea of our democracy and the idea of America.
You can see Free Thought Matters on TV stations all across the U.S. and also on FFRF's Facebook and YouTube channels.
And don't miss Free Thought Radio. This week, Annie Laurie and Dan speak with National Public Radio reporter Sarah McCammon about her new book, The Ex-Evangelicals, Loving, Living, and Leaving the White Evangelical Church. You can find Free Thought Radio at ffrf.org/radio.
And check out the latest episode of our We Dissent podcast. In our latest episode, we talked to Baptist Joint Committee's Amanda Tyler. She tells us about BJC's Christians Against Christian Nationalism campaign and the strong Baptist history of supporting state church separation. Listen and subscribe to We Dissent wherever you get podcasts, or check us out at we-dissent.org. And if you want more information about FFRF, check us out at ffrf.org. If you're a member already, thank you. And if not, please join us. See you next week on Ask an Atheist.